is Thursday, the 26th of November, 2020, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside around the UK and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
And as of the day of recording, it is Doctor Who's 57th birthday.
Yeah, the show.
I thought he was older than that.
No, the 50th anniversary was 7 years ago, and thus mathematics dictates that today is Doctor Who's 57th birthday.
I was doing a hilarious joke about the character also being called Doctor Who, and he looked older than 50.
Except, one, the character is not called Doctor Who, and two, the character who was called Doctor Who, was played by Peter Cushing, actually probably would have been older than that, although Peter Cushing wasn't when he played him. So a complex set of circumstances. And that purely, that is the reason the joke fell flat.
Yeah.
Not at all that I missed it.
Absolutely. Well, happy birthday to Doctor Who if you are listening and exist. And if that is your real name, which it isn't on any level. Are you guys doing all right?
It's been a trying old decade, and it shows signs of perking up, actually, with, several different pharmaceutical companies now have said, we've got vaccines. And it's like...
More on that later.
Oh, that looks okay. I hope. Maybe. I did see the vaccine that came out of Oxford, which is much cheaper than everyone's vaccine, but they're quoting the figures of it not being as effective, which, as far as I can see, are slightly misleading figures. And, it's all very complicated. But, yeah, terrible decade.
We'll come back to it later.
I think Alice is going to tell us all about all of that, I guess.
How about you two?
Yeah, this year can basically get to fuck pretty soon, ideally. That'd be pretty good.
I mean, there's not much left of it.
Yeah, but it's 2020. I mean, we're at the bit of the film where we've shot him in the back. He's fallen off the balcony. The end of November is where you look over the balcony and the body's gone. And we're just about... December is going to be the bit where, you think it's dead. Oh, and he comes back for a couple more scares.
Yeah.
In the horror show that is 2020, that's what we've got coming up. There's going to be some random stabbing from the month of December, just when we're not looking.
I feel like where we are is Tony Stark is in a wheelchair with a drip, getting all up in Captain America's face, saying, we needed you and you weren't there. And we are at our lowest ebb as a species. Not to over-egg that or anything.
So you think December's going to be better then?
No, I think I think we are at the lowest of the low, and we've got at least the entire duration of Endgame before we get to anything nice happening.
Yeah, and that was a 5-year gap as well. So what you're saying is things won't get much better until 2025. All right, well, on that cheery opener.
Do you remember when we used to do cheery openers? When it used to be, I went to a gig, I went to this nice restaurant, I saw this great film. And now it's just like, how are you? Shit, I'm shit. Are you shit?
Haven't died yet. Tick.
We're all shit. But we did QED.
We did do QED. We did do QED 2018 again.
That was just over a week ago, nearly 2 weeks ago. And that was good. I thought that was fun. It was very well received. People seemed to have a good time. People were in the chat on Twitch, like welling up, going like, "Oh my God, I forgot, so many memories, so many friends, so many things that I enjoyed." So, and it was really nice to be able to, in these darkest of days, in the Tony Stark is in a wheelchair with a drip of our times, it was nice to be able to give people that little ray of sunshine, the sassy line from Rocket Raccoon that gives everyone a little smile. when things are down. I really enjoyed doing QED. The thing I found oddest about QED, though, is that by the end of the weekend, I was shattered. And I'd sat at a desk for 2 days. I was still shattered.
Yeah.
I had to take 3 days off work. I was fucked.
That's what happens when you sit at a desk for too long, though, Alex, in fairness. You've got, reasons for that.
Yeah.
How did you feel about QED 2018, given that you weren't there the first time? Did you enjoy it this time round?
Well, in true organising QED fashion, I didn't see very much of it.
Didn't see a frame of it. Nothing.
We had no choice. There wasn't much else we needed to do. We just needed to be there and click play on a video, which someone else was doing anyway. We popped up to be like, "Hey guys, watch this video. See us." That's about as much as we did.
I watched some bits and pieces. It was very good. Go back and watch the rest of the videos. Now they're all on YouTube.
That's it. They are all on YouTube. So anybody who wasn't able to come to QED 2018 or come to QED 2018 again online, people, for example, in a southern hemisphere like a Brazil or an Australia or something like that, the videos are all up on YouTube /QEDcon. Or at least all the ones we put out. There's a couple of videos still from the event that we didn't show over the course of the weekend.
Yeah, which we didn't edit because we weren't planning to screen them on Twitch, so we don't have them to put up yet.
Yeah.
There was one video that I haven't uploaded to our YouTube yet, which is our recording of God Awful Movies. And the reason I haven't uploaded the episode of God Awful Movies is because the first 8 minutes of it are missing. And that resulted in me having to deploy a cheap trick used by Doctor Who fans to fill in the missing parts of that episode by putting still pictures of Noah, Heath, and Eli in various animated poses to try and make it look like they were saying what they were saying.
It kind of worked. It worked pretty well.
I thought it came out okay. I mean, I say, Doctor Who fans, we've been doing this for decades. It's our shtick. Because there are many missing episodes of Doctor Who. I think we've talked about that on air before, about how there's lots of missing episodes of Doctor Who. But one of the things that Doctor Who benefits from is because there were no home video recorders, etc., there was a chap named John Cura. And he used to sell a service to television producers and directors called Telesnaps, where he would sit at home and take photographs of his telly.
What?
While the show you were in was airing so that you could have some sort of permanent physical record of them. And for many episodes...
He just took photos of his telly?
Just took photos of his... He had a special lens on his camera. He was like a proper photographer and got properly up close to the telly so you couldn't, so it was effectively a full screen like photograph. But he took pictures of his telly and then sold them to producers and directors so they would have records of their work. And a lot of directors during the first few seasons of Doctor Who used to employ John Cura to get records of their stuff. And now these are the only things that exist of those missing episodes is John Cura's pictures, literally of his telly.
This is ludicrous because surely if you were the director and what you needed was the action playing out in front of you, that you could put a camera between you and the action and take periodic recordings of what's happening. You already did have a camera between you and the action because you were directing at the time. Could they not just shortcut and just had someone take photos at the time rather than wait until it's broadcast and have some guy stood with his camera uncomfortably close to his old telly?
Well, this is not the way that the BBC worked back in the days of yore. And so what we classically do is we take John Cura's pictures and we set them to the audio of the episode. So you get the correct action just at a very, very poor frame rate. And so I copied that. That's what I did is I copied that to make the first 8 minutes of God Awful Movies. But instead of taking pictures of my television, I used clips of Noah, Heath, and Eli from later in the episode.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Eli is a very animated talker.
Yes.
Eli moves around a lot when he speaks, so trying to get some expression into an animation of Eli is really easy. Noah, on the other hand, does not fucking move.
Yeah.
Noah looks at his microphone and doesn't move his mouth. And Noah is so hard to animate.
Yeah, I don't think Noah's moved at any point during any of the recordings. I think he's still where he was on episode 1, and it's just his brain and his mouth that's moved in that time.
But it was terrific fun to do, and people were very kind about it as well, and said, "Oh, actually, this is quite fun. This is quite watchable," and people were enjoying that. So I have not yet put that on YouTube, mostly because I think I kind of want to make sure the GAM guys are okay with that first,
right?
Before just saying, "Here's a shit animation of you guys. Have fun." Have fun with that.
I think I might have told them. I think I might have mentioned to Eli. I'll have to remember. But yeah, we'll check that out and we can put that one up as well. And there was a live Incredulous as well, which if people weren't able to watch it live, should be up at some point in the future soon as well.
That will be published in due course. Is my understanding. There is a missing episode of Incredulous, but this is not destined to be the second one, from what I understand. Incredulous was terrific fun as well. I really enjoyed watching that.
It's so surreal to do when you know there's people watching it live who you can't hear or see. It's fine when you're doing it just as a podcast, you know there's only the three of you, a lot of the people on the call. That's absolutely fine. That's normal. You can see the people you're talking to. There's no one else listening in. It's fine doing it in front of a live audience because you can see everyone there. It's the difference of knowing there is a live audience that you can't see is really weird.
It's the Prisoner's Dilemma version of Incredulous where you're telling a joke and you don't know if they're laughing or not. Are they laughing along? Has your joke fallen flat?
Yeah.
Are you being shown up? Are they betraying you behind your back?
The idea that there is laughter and applause that is for me that I can't hear is basically torture to me.
People were literally in the chat writing clap, 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 clap is what they did to indicate their approval.
That's because Twitch emojis are terrible.
They are awful. They are
and impossible to find.
Yeah.
Well, as regular listeners will obviously know, in September we took over as publishers of The Skeptic, and I've been the editor of The Skeptic since September. And as huge amounts of fun as that has been, one of the things that goes with publishing articles to The Skeptic is also running the Ockham Awards. And we mentioned on previous shows that we're accepting nominations for the very best in skepticism and the very worst in pseudoscience for the Ockham Award and the Rusty Razor Award. And during last week's Skeptics in the Pub Online, we had the tremendous pleasure of giving those awards out and doing it live to the Skeptics in the Pub Online audience as a bit of a kind of a live award ceremony. And because all of that was on YouTube, and we've already talked about using YouTube material and getting that back out there, we thought we'd actually let you hear, for those who weren't there live at the time, we thought we'd let you hear how that award ceremony played out and who the winners are. So I'd like to throw over to me from the past to tell you who won this year's Ockham Awards and Rusty Razor.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much,
Marsh from the future.
So yeah, I'm here as editor of The Skeptic. And since 1987, The Skeptic's been publishing expert analysis of pseudoscience, conspiracy theory, and claims of the paranormal. And then in September of this year, I was announced as the editor of the revamped publication. And we've been publishing pieces from all around the skeptic community pretty much daily since the start of September. If you've not seen the work that we've been doing, I invite you to check it out at skeptic.org.uk, and you can see some of the articles that are already there. So in 2012, the then editor of The Skeptic, Deborah Hyde, founded the Ockham Awards for Skeptical Excellence. And it was really, they were designed as a chance for us to recognize the people in our community who are trying to make the world a better place. And some of those people are people who offered support and resources to the skeptical community with things like blogs and podcasts and events that brought skeptics together and helped us remember that we're not alone in caring about the causes that motivate us. But we've also offered, beyond that, recognition to the activists and the campaigns that have sought to step outside of our bubble and try to improve the wider world. Among past winners of the Ockhams, we've got shining examples of this kind of solid, effective skepticism. We've seen awards for blogging for Professor Edzard Ernst for his tireless efforts to expose the lack of evidence behind all manner of alternative medical practices. We've seen awards for Britt Hermes for her work blowing the whistle on the naturopathic industry, which she used to be part of. And if people have been following the Skeptics in the Pub Online series of talks, you'll have seen Britt talking about her whistleblowing work and the extremely dangerous things she saw when she was studying and practicing as a naturopath. And there was a blog award for Johnny Scaramanga, who documented his journey out of fundamentalism and demonstrated the pernicious pseudoscience of extremist religious educational programs. But we've also seen Ockham Awards for podcasting, going to people like Susie Gage for Say Why to Drugs, to the European Skeptics podcast for documenting skeptical activities all across Europe and showing that skepticism is a pan-European community, and also to the Pod Delusion, who bagged a couple of early Ockhams for their excellent skeptical magazine show amongst the first Ockham Awards ever handed out. The Podcasting Ockham Award also saw what can only be described as a prolific run of near misses for my own podcast, Skeptics with a K, which we actually considered subtitling Always the Bridesmaid, but we didn't go with that in the end. There's been Ockham Awards for Activism, which have been things like the award that was given out for stopping the disastrous Saatchi bill being made into law, the award that was given out for standing up to Sally Morgan and her team when they threatened to first beat up and later sue Mark Tilbrook because he was politely protesting her shows, and they tried to intimidate him into silence, and Mark won an award for standing up to that intimidation. There was an Ockham Award for good thinking, for the charity that I work for the work that we did successfully challenging and ending NHS homeopathy spending across the country. And as someone who's been on the receiving end of a couple of Ockham Awards, I know how much it means to be recognised by our community. Because, of course, these awards are your awards. We asked you to tell us, who do you think deserves to be rewarded, deserves to be recognised, whose work over the last year was particularly impressive or inspirational, for someone who you thought epitomised the very best aspects of skepticism. And that's exactly what you did. And that brings us very, very neatly to our first award of the evening, the Ockham Award for Skeptical Activism. For this award, we were looking for an individual or an organisation who's done outstanding work to promote critical thinking over the last 12 months. We wanted you to think about the impact that they had, the change they've brought about. We want you to think about the reach that they had and whether they were growing the skeptical community and reaching people outside of it. And we want you to think about what they've achieved in 2020. And we're really pleased to see that we had a lot of nominations for this award and some really, really strong contenders. Honourable mentions go to people like Dr. Emma Bryant for her role in exposing and challenging disinformation and propaganda, which are things that we as skeptics are more than aware of the dangers of those things of disinformation and propaganda. There was a really strong mention for the Cosmic Shambles Network, their superb series of podcasts and live stream broadcasts and in-person events. Like, do you remember in-person events back when those were a real thing? And they certainly did a huge amount to reach people, not just people within the skeptical community, but beyond it into wider society, the people who attended their many, many events. There was nominations for podcasts that tracked and exposed conspiracy theories, including the QAnon Anonymous podcast and the Knowledge Fight podcast, which covers Alex Jones's InfoWars and the various conspiracy theories he's putting out. Both of those are shows that they're doing a skeptical service by going deep into the weeds of dangerous conspiracy theories to figure out where are these claims coming from before they ever end up on your uncle's Facebook feed or written on a placard and marched through the streets of an anti-lockdown, anti-mask, anti-vaccine, QAnon, satanic paedophilia march, as we've seen all through cities across the UK lately. And any of those would be worthy winners. But in the end, the choice was clear. As the world has faced this barrage of misinformation surrounding COVID-19, our winner has been a shining light of skepticism, science, and critical thinking. When we talk about reach and impact, our winner is someone who's been a near constant voice in the media in one of the biggest and most populated countries in the world, a country that's among the hardest hit by COVID-19, in which pseudoscience is promoted and prescribed from the very top of the government. And so it's my great pleasure to announce the 2020 Ockham Award for Skeptical Activism goes to Dr. Natalia Pasternak from Brazil's Instituto Questão de Ciência. Please show your appreciation for Dr. Pasternak, who joins us now live from Sao Paulo. Natalia, congratulations for being our 2020 Ockham Award winner.
Thank you so much, Marsh. It's an honor, and you have no idea how much this means to me personally, to my institute, to my team, and to Brazil. Hearing you talk about all the past prizes, all the past awards, makes me wonder if I'm the first non-English speaker, non-native speaker to receive the award. So it's amazing that my work here in Brazil has reached out to the world and that you find it important enough to give me an international award. So it's an honor to me and to Brazil. And it's really, really important to get recognition, to get this kind of international recognition for my work here in Brazil that's mainly in Portuguese and somehow could reach out to you in England. And of course, it's my pleasure also to write for the Skeptic magazine once a month. So it's really, I think the most important thing about it is to really feel part of an international skeptic community and have the support of everyone in this community throughout the world. It really feels less lonely down here in Brazil. And I think having your help and your support really helps me keep on here because, you know, it's quite a challenge. When pseudoscience is promoted by the federal government itself, it's really hard to fight. And I don't think I could do it without all the international support that I'm getting, especially from you. So thank you very much. And I'm deeply honored by this award.
Well, congratulations again, and we will be sure to send this award to you. It'll be in the post and it will arrive however long it takes to fly this lovely award to you. But please continue.
It'll probably take longer to reach me once it gets to Brazil because a Brazilian post is widely known for its incompetence. So.
Well, fingers crossed it makes it. And please, everyone, show your appreciation for Dr. Natalia Pasternak. And if you want to know more about the work that Natalia's doing that we think was so inspirational, if you go to the Skeptics Above Online YouTube channel, you can see the talk that she gave for us a few months ago now, I think it was, talking about all the stuff that was really happening in Brazil. And I'm sure you'll be just as inspired as we were at The Skeptic. So moving on to our next award, from an award for outstanding skepticism, we come to very much the opposite of that. Because while we at The Skeptic recognise the very best in skepticism, our awards are also an opportunity to shine a light on and highlight the danger posed by promoters of pseudoscience with our rusty razor Award. The Rusty Razor here is designed to spotlight individuals or organizations who've been particularly prominent promoters of unscientific ideas within the last year. The inaugural Rusty Razor Award in 2017 went to Gwyneth Paltrow for her pseudoscience peddling wellness empire Goop. And I'm sure you'll agree that was a very worthwhile winner. The following year, in 2018, the award went to the disgraced former Dr. Andrew Wakefield for his ongoing promotion of anti-vaccine misinformation. And that's a topic that sadly has not gone away. And as we were just saying, I think it looks set to be one of the defining issues of skepticism in 2021, as we see not only the COVID crisis, but also the emergences now of a vaccine. And we're already seeing a very well organized and vociferous anti-vaccine movement. So clearly that kind of misinformation does not go away. And while there were lots of strong and pretty varied contenders for the Skeptical Activism Award, the Rusty Razor nominations were almost universally focused on pseudoscientific claims regarding the pandemic. There was an honourable mention, for example, for Ian Brown and Noel Gallagher for discouraging mask wearing and for the spreading of false information about the coronavirus. And unfortunately, for fans of Oasis and the Stone Roses, Ian and Noel have walked the well-trodden path, it turns out now, of 80s and 90s musicians from Manchester going completely off the deep end, which is otherwise known as going the full Morrissey. So we have a triumvirate of Mancunian indie popsters spouting misinformation and fairly dodgy claims at the moment. We had quite a lot of political nominations for the Rusty Razor Award, including a special mention for Dominic Cummings, for his COVID-spreading driving tour of the Northeast in late March. And as someone who's actually from the very County Durham villages that Dominic Cummings drove through while apparently unsure of his ability to see, I can promise you there are definitely better ways to check your eyesight than getting in a car and driving past my granddad's house. So he may well have been worthy of a nomination for that alone, if nothing more than that. But there were more nominations than that. And the political nominations and the COVID-19 nominations, they overlapped to form a very clear pattern. You know, we saw a lot of people nominating the soon-to-be former US President Donald Trump, and we saw a lot of people nominating Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, two men who went out of their way to promote one particular alleged miracle cure for COVID-19, hydroxychloroquine. And their promotion of it, along with promotion by Irish conspiracy theorist Dolores Cahill, who also got a Rusty Razor nomination, and by InfoWars' Alex Jones, who also got a Rusty Razor Award nomination, and by countless other quacks who promoted hydroxychloroquine, and conspiracy theorists and pseudoscientists, all of that promotion really was based on studies published by one particular researcher. So the Rusty Razor Award for Worst Pseudoscience of 2020 goes to French microbiologist Dr. Didier Raoult for his hydroxychloroquine research. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Raoult did not get back to us when I invited him to come accept his award tonight. So instead, to accept the award on his behalf and to explain a little bit more about why exactly he won it, please welcome Deputy Editor of The Skeptic and clinical pharmacologist, Dr. Alice Howarth. Alice, would you like to explain to the viewers why we came to, as part of the Skeptics editorial board, we came to the decision that Didier Raoult was our worthy winner of the Rusty Razor for 2020?
So, yes, the particular study that earned Raoult this honour of the Rusty Razor Award was one that was published in March 2020. The study was published on the 20th of March after a peer review turnaround of 24 hours since submission to the International Journal of Antimicrobial Agents. 3 days before the paper was published, and indeed 2 days before it was submitted, Raoult published a video online claiming that a combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin reduced the duration in which a person with COVID-19 was contagious and enhanced their recovery time. The study that was published was poorly controlled, with many control patients treated in entirely different hospital facilities in different towns than the test patients. The claims of the study largely related to a combination of both hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, those same claims which were repeated on social media by Donald Trump. However, only 6 patients were given that combined treatment. Most worryingly, the data of patients who stopped the treatment before the end of the study was excluded, even though 3 of those patients were transferred to intensive care and 1 of those patients died. Since the paper was published, the recovery trial out of Oxford has found that there is no clinical benefit from using hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19. Rout is one of the most cited microbiologists in the world and was once considered a leader in his field. Yet he used that reputation to publish bad science, which went on to be quoted by world leaders. The consequences of this include reducing availability of these drugs for people who need them for other conditions and an erosion in public trust in science as these claims went on to be disproven, as well as wasted time and resources as researchers rushed to corroborate or disprove the claims. For me, Rout stands as someone who exemplifies how science is not infallible. Science is conducted by humans and humans are biased and make mistakes. But good science accounts for those biases using reasonable controls and by providing data for scrutiny to the wider scientific community. In this case, that scrutiny highlighted the major flaws with Rout's study, but not before the flawed findings reached a wider audience amplified through social media by world leaders. This award is given to Rout, but it highlights the consequences of combining bad science with good public outreach and how dangerous ideas can proliferate through social media.
Thank you so much, Alice. I'm sure all of our viewers and all of the readers of The Skeptic and the Skeptic community will stand behind Didier Rout as a very worthy winner of this Rusty Razor Award, the redesigned Rusty Razor Award. Unfortunately, he hasn't accepted the award, but we will continue to try to get it to him. And finally, tonight, we've got one last award to hand out. And this isn't one that we asked you to give us nominations for. This is the Editor's Choice Award. And this is an award that The Skeptic gives out when a person or an organization has done some outstanding work within the skeptical community, and we want to give them that extra bit of recognition. In 2012, the first ever Editor's Choice Award went to Mike Hutchinson, a stalwart of the UK skeptical movement since the mid-70s, who'd been involved in managing subscriptions to the Skeptic magazine for decades and involved in many other things amongst that time. In 2014, Deborah Hyde and Chris French gave the Editor's Choice Award to the QED conference, which was somewhat mischievous, given that we'd agreed QED wasn't eligible for public nominations because the awards ceremony usually takes place at QED and we didn't want things to be awkward. This very award ceremony would have been taking place at QED had there not been a pandemic in. But that brings us to our decision to give out an Editor's Choice Award as part of the 2020 Occam, because, and I think you'll all agree, it's been a pretty weird year. And normality and regularity have been in very short supply. The events that we've come to rely on to remind ourselves that we're part of a community that's supportive and kind and compassionate and inclusive, those events simply haven't been able to happen. And it would have been very easy for us to all feel disconnected and adrift. But what we've seen instead is a remarkable effort to bring people together, to show unity in the face of this crisis and to give the skeptical community something to gather around. And so the 2020 Editor's Choice Ockham Award goes to Skeptics in the Pub Online. Now, Skeptics in the Pub Online, as we all know, is a coalition of lots and lots of skeptic groups from all around the country working together to put on high-quality events every single week, stretching all the way back to the start of the first lockdown at the end of March. And in that time, we've held 33 events, plus a Halloween special and a ludicrous rebroadcast of the 2018 QED conference. And all of those events have been free to attend for anyone to come along to. And yet they've been produced to a technical quality that many paid events could only dream of managing. And that's only happened because so many people have been so willing to collaborate, to compromise, and to work together under a banner that represents all of us. And it's felt genuinely exciting and special to be part of it. And because there's so many people involved in running Skeptics Above Online, all of whom you'll see on the credit screen that rolls around during the breaks, I can't get all of them on screen to accept this. But I'm sure everybody who's involved would agree that of everybody who's involved, few have been more active and more supportive and more unflappable under pressure as one particular guy who doesn't normally appear on camera, except to be the landlord of the Zoom pub, the Lock-In's Razor. So who better to bring on screen right now to accept the award on behalf of everybody involved in Skeptics Above Online than David Glass. David, please join us online to accept the Occam Editor's Choice Award.
Hi, everyone. I feel like I've been a little bit stitched up here because this is a huge surprise, but wow, I'm genuinely speechless. We kind of volunteered to do this months and months and months ago, but it's been something that has been massively rewarding for me and everyone else who's taking part. I'm so happy and so proud to accept this on behalf of everyone who's put so much effort in. This is how good I am at being on camera. So this is why you will never catch me hosting one of these events, but I don't know what else to say. Thank you very much, everybody. I've thoroughly enjoyed it and it's been a wonderful time.
Everybody, please fill the chat there with appreciation, not just for David, but for everybody in Skeptics Pub Online. If this is your first time, you're in for a treat throughout the rest of the evening, and for everything that's on YouTube as well. You'll see the names of everybody involved in that credit slide as it rolls around, and everybody involved has really contributed to make this something that's really kept a lot of people going in terms of skeptical connection throughout the lockdown. So that brings us to the end of the Ockham Awards for this year, and I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who submitted nominations, and a massive congratulations to all of the winners. I'd invite everybody to check out the work we've been doing at The Skeptic for compassionate skepticism that I'm really proud to be able to publish. You can see that at skeptic.org.uk. I'm proud of all the writers that we're publishing there and the work that we're doing. And I sincerely hope everybody enjoys the rest of the evening. I know Pixie's talk is going to be fantastic. Stick around, make sure you enjoy that. And thank you so much for being part of the Ockham Awards nominations and announcements tonight. Thank you.
So that was a huge amount of fun. And what was particularly nice was, obviously, we told people we were doing the Skeptical Activism Award, and Natalia is a hugely, hugely worthwhile winner of that. She absolutely earned it and deserved it. And we'll talk about that in a second. And we told people we're doing the Rusty Razor Award, and Didier Rout is a hugely, hugely deserved winner of that. And we'll talk about that in a second. But what we didn't tell people, as you might have heard listening back to it there, was that there was a third award for the Editor's Choice Award, which we gave to Skeptics in the Pub Online, which nobody involved in Skeptics in the Pub Online, apart from those of us also involved in the Skeptic Mag, were aware of. And so we did that live show, knowing we had a third award up our sleeve, or at least kind of out of sight on the table in front of me, knowing full well that we were engineering to have David Glass from the Skeptics Pub Online team accept it, because he's been a huge, powerful force behind the scenes for Skeptics Pub Online, but he hasn't really ever been in front of the camera except for during the Zoom pub that we do. So we did this kind of slightly sneaky thing of making sure that he was backup tech for the day, knowing that we were going to throw him in front of the audience to accept it. So that was really fun, and it was really nice to see everybody not just kind of getting into the spirit of the awards for the Skeptics in the Pub Online, which has done a huge amount, I think, for the skeptical community. And what I tried to say there, I think it's true to say that it's easy to forget that we are a community, and easy to forget that we are pushing in the same direction, and that we're an initiative and a group of people and a movement who are there to be compassionate and inclusive and considerate and kind. And I think Skeptics in the Pub Online has been a fantastic example of that. And so it was really a pleasure to be able to give that award for the fact that there's been, I think, every week pretty much since the lockdown, there's been very quickly put together this initiative to show weekly talks that just got better and better in terms of the technical execution, to a point where it's basically broadcast tech now that they're using.
It's absolutely. I've not been involved in Skeptics in the Pub Online at all. I've had no input on it, no say in it, nothing. I have only consumed that content as a viewer, and to the extent that I know what goes on behind the scenes, it's just because, like, I know you guys, and so that's how I know what goes on there. But from the perspective of a viewer, and also a viewer who's a picky little shit, it's absolutely astonishing what Skeptics in the Pub Online has been able to achieve. The level of polish, the level of professionalism, the consistent output, and as I said something very similar at the end of QED, is that all of it being done for love and not for money. And it's a remarkable level of commitment, because it could have been done to a lower standard and no one would have thought twice.
Yeah.
That it was done to such a high and professional standard, just out of pride, just out of this is the right way to do this, is absolutely astonishing. And it's brilliant. And I thought it was absolutely right to recognise that with the Editor's Choice Award this year.
Yeah, it's been such a fun thing to be part of, for sure. And then when it comes to the Skeptical Activism Award, I think we got, as I mentioned, we got lots of nominations, but Natalia is such a worthwhile winner. As it happens, just before we recorded this, I was giving a lecture for Natalia online to her science communication class at Sao Paulo University. And one of the things she just happened to mention offhand when it comes to science journalism and trying to equip journalists in Brazil for a better ability to evaluate scientific stories was that she and the IQC, the institute that she runs, ran a seminar for any journalist in Brazil to turn up to for free. They would use it to explain the terminology, the science, the way in which vaccines work, and the way that vaccines get tested, how they get developed, and talk journalists through that. And I think they had dozens and dozens, I think like 50 or more journalists turn up just for free to see that, so that they know when the vaccine stories come in, how best to educate the public about that. And I think it's initiatives like that that are really smart, really well thought out, and really effective. Because if that education does filter down into the stories that get produced, that then filters down into, literally in Brazil, hundreds of millions of people who could potentially be influenced by a better science story in there, which could then genuinely affect the vaccine take-up. And so it's initiatives like that. And I think for Natalie to have been involved in skepticism for, I think, just over 2 years, and her institute is 2 years old, the amount they've achieved in that short space of time is really impressive.
It is fabulous, fabulous work that they're doing down there.
And then we have the Rusty Razor Award for Did You Out? And that has been an interesting one, because often when we do the Rusty Razor Award, we get a little bit of attention to it. So the first one, I know that Deborah gave the first award to Goop, and that made it into several different newspapers in the UK, and it made it across into America to Fox News and various other places too, I believe. And then the second one in 2018 went to Andrew Wakefield, and that got some media attention in the UK here and there. But this time, because this was for Did You Out, it didn't get any media attention in the UK, but it got a lot of attention in France. And it has been a weird week of sifting through the Twitter mentions of a lot of people in France responding to someone who was previously a highly respected, highly cited professor of microbiology, who's published the work regarding hydroxychloroquine, which, as Alice mentioned in the awards ceremony, was deeply flawed. It's been a lot of people who are intensely fond of Rout and his work, who are really, really affronted by the idea that he would get an award for pseudoscience. Or it's a lot of people who are sort of celebrating the fact that he got an award in a way that I can't tell if it's sarcastic or if it's just French. There's a lot of people going, yes, well done, Professor. Clap emoji, clap emoji, clap emoji. It's like, do you definitely know this is a bullshit award, like for bullshit? Or do you know that and you're just taking the piss, but you're very, very dryly sarcastic in doing so? So my Google Translate has been working overdrive on Twitter to understand all of these things. And it's been just astonishing how much of an impact that story's had, how much reach it's had in France. And also how many Did You Out fanboys, fangirls, fanfolk there are in France. It's been pretty passionate, the response.
I remember looking at, so we've been running, as we mentioned, we've been running Skeptic magazine now since September. And in that time, the most popular article that we published so far has been the free speech experiment, Monster Island free speech experiment by Aaron Rabinowitz. And the DDA Rout story and that was like way above everything else that we were doing. It was incredibly popular. It was all over Reddit. It was all over Facebook. It was a huge story for us. And this has just blown that away to the tune of about 4 or 5-fold. It's like, Jesus Christ. Everyone got really, again, all over Reddit. It was on Hacker News. And it was on Hacker News because I submitted to Hacker News. But nevertheless, it got significant engagement when it was there. And with people in the comments arguing, Rout's a genius. No, he's not. He's a fraud. No, he's a genius. No, he's a charlatan, etc., 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 going round and round. Remarkable how many people are like massively passionate DDA Rout fans.
And also my emails have become very interesting. The thing is, I'm getting a lot of emails that are quite aggressive, that are like, who are you? Who do you think you are? You are nothing compared to him. One email from somebody who just said, Dr. Rout is number one, you are nothing. You have no shame. Dr. Rout is a shapely head, recognized scientist, and you don't have the stature to judge it. You are deplorable. And I want to think some of that is lost in translation, but I hope shapely head is what he meant.
From a programmer's perspective, if DDA Rout is number one and you are 0, then you're before him.
That is true.
You're better than he is in terms of that ranking list.
And we've had a lot of people writing to like, I demand to know who funds the Skeptic. It's like, right, well, the Merseyside Skeptic Society fund the Skeptic.
Yeah.
Who funds them? Good question. Largely Patreon subscribers to Skeptics with a K. We've got no other big money coming in. It's very much, and it was quite nice to be able to say the funding for MSS comes from this specific link. You can see how many people and how much they give us per month. That is it, which that was interesting, and pointing out that we do this for the love of it. I did get one particularly interesting email from a chap called Carl in South Africa. And I thought it was quite a useful email for us to discuss, actually. So I thought I'd bring it up on the show. And what he said is, in his job, he deals with lots of debates with people who hold beliefs outside of the scientific consensus. and he's not always kind of calm and things about it. But he wanted to write about the Rusty Razor and the award for Didier Raoult because he works with marine biologists who specialize in genetics, who suggested that Didier Raoult's work shouldn't qualify for the Rusty Razor because while his work is undoubtedly bad science, it is still science, and it is therefore not pseudoscience, and therefore shouldn't be eligible for the Pseudoscience Award. And he was interested to hear what we thought about that distinction. And I've got some thoughts on the distinction, but Alice, I don't know if you've got some thoughts as the resident scientist here.
I don't think the person who said that is wrong. Like, it's bad science. The paper that we talked about is not pseudoscience, it is bad science. A big part of the reason that for me, made Didier Raoult the obvious choice was that it has been used to justify a lot of pseudoscience across the globe. And that's had a massive effect on how people are managing the pandemic.
Yeah, I think I agree, really. And I think it's quite similar in a way to when Andrew Wakefield, in fact, very similar in a way to when Andrew Wakefield won the award, which I don't think people would have questioned Andrew Wakefield winning an award for pseudoscience, when actually the start of Andrew Wakefield's anti-vaccine career came when he published a scientific study that was incredibly flawed. It turns out to actually have been so flawed as to be fabricated in places, some of the data, and fraudulent in some of the places. But it in itself was a scientific study published in a respected academic journal, making a scientific claim using bad science to do so. But I think the fact that it has gone on to inspire a lot of alternative treatments, a lot of alternative views, a lot of anti-science views, I think that's very similar to Didier Raoult's work. Strangely, a lot of the people in America who are very passionately promoting hydroxychloroquine are also the people who think Big Pharma's out to get you, missing the fact that hydroxychloroquine is a pharmaceutical sold presumably by big pharma companies. It fits into that alternative worldview. And I also think that the award is for essentially pseudoscience or science in the areas that we study, which have led to harm, led to misleading the public, led to an erosion in the understanding of science in the public. And I think on that grounds, it counts as pseudoscience, even if the work itself wasn't pseudoscientific.
I think I've got a slightly different perspective on it from you guys, is that I'm not convinced there is an appreciable difference between bad science and pseudoscience. Pseudoscience, to my mind, pseudoscience is something that has the superficial veneer of resembling science, but isn't actually science. And I'm not convinced that there's actually a meaningful distinction to be had there between bad science and pseudoscience, unless you're going to go straight into, out and out superstition. This works by pixie dust. Okay, I don't know that's pseudoscience. That's just magic. That's just superstition. Whereas this, to claim this works by some previously unknown mechanism that the measurements that we used that couldn't plausibly do that, I think that could be said to be bad science and pseudoscience at the same time. So I'm not persuaded that there's a meaningful distinction to be had there, but I'm willing to hear arguments otherwise.
I think maybe you're right that it's a gradient. I think you've got hardcore pseudoscience, hardcore science, and there's a line somewhere where the overlap is quite blurry, and your bad science could be arguably pseudoscience. I do think in this case it does. The study, particularly that we talked about, was leaning more on the science side. It was badly controlled science that was poor, but it was conducted in the way that we would conduct any other trial, any other proper placebo-controlled study. It was just done badly. So I'm persuaded that it would lean more towards bad science than pseudoscience. But I agree, there's probably a gradient, and there's somewhere in the middle that's a bit grayer.
And I think for me, if this study had been done and they hadn't said what the treatment being studied was, they just said treatment X, and then you saw this study, you would quite easily slip into thinking, oh, this is one of those homeopathy studies where they've got really poor numbers and they exclude the people who don't respond the way that you want, and the controls are bad and the blinding's bad. And this is just a way of trying to justify a pseudoscientific claim by having the trappings of a scientific study, but actually a really badly conducted one that actually doesn't make the point. And I think the fact that what you were giving was a real drug for something else doesn't really appreciably make a difference. But it also reminds me of something that I was talking to Jonathan Jarry the other day, and he was sort of sharing one of his concerns, and it actually comes up in something that we're going to be publishing to The Skeptic in the next couple of weeks. when the distinctions between pseudoscience and science were a lot clearer, or pseudoscience and bad science were a lot clearer, when it was things like homeopathy is pseudoscience. Why is it pseudoscience? Well, you've got no RCTs that back it up. There's no well-conducted trial. You haven't got any scientific studies that prove that this particular homeopathic intervention works. The homeopaths went away and started producing reams of studies. And there are now probably more studies that say homeopathy works than demonstrate homeopathy doesn't work. But those studies are all bad science. And so it almost felt reminiscent of that, is that we told the pseudoscientists what you need to do is get scientific studies published in journals, and they went away and they did that, and they've published loads of them, and they're all bollocks, but they're out there. And so that's maybe the distinctions between what was a health pseudoscience and bad science claim health-wise or in any kind of area. Those distinctions have blurred partly because we spent a long time as a movement over the last couple of decades, not actually just us, telling pseudoscientists to go away and do some scientific research.
And obviously, like we talk about both on this podcast. Like, we clearly think both are important to skeptics. We would have talked about this paper. I read this paper when it came out. I dismantled this paper when it came out. We would have talked about it on the podcast, I'm sure, had I not been suffering with COVID at the time. I was literally ill with COVID at the time that this paper came out, and I was trying to make sense of it while feeling very not well. At
any point were you tempted to try some hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin?
Not at all. Not at all. It's a truly awful paper. You know, I read it in detail at the time. I've gone back over it a couple of times since then. I've actually used it as an example for undergrad students to teach them how to analyse papers, to look for flaws in papers. It's not a good study at all. But it's the kind of thing we do talk about on the podcast. We don't just focus on things that are straight down the line, obvious, clear pseudoscience, just homeopathy, just the stuff that has absolutely no evidence of efficacy, because there's a lot of stuff that has some evidence of efficacy that is then used to make bold claims that are damaging to a large group of people. And this is exactly what that is.
Yeah, I think so. So hopefully, Carl, if you're listening, that has helped. And I'll be directing Carl to this episode anyway, so you can hear that. But hopefully all of the listeners will agree that our two Ockham Award winners in Natalia Pasternak from Instituto Question de Ciencia, practiced that and then I fucked it up when I did it on the night. So both Natalia and Skeptics in the Pub Online are both worthy winners and worthy recipients of praise for their skeptical work. And Didier Rout is a worthy winner of the Rusty Razor Award.
For months, speaking of COVID, you've been asking me about vaccines for COVID-19.
I have. Specifically, I've been asking you to get your finger out and make one, Alice, and you said no every single time.
Yeah, I'm not going to make one.
It's not my job to do that. Well, suck it up. Get on with it.
For months, I've been brushing it off and telling you to ask me later. There's a few reasons I've been brushing it off. It's not laziness. It's not just laziness. There are reasons why I've kind of held off talking about it on the podcast. And there's lots of reasons I've kind of held off talking about lots of COVID stuff, partly because we're all human. It's a miserable time. We don't want to be constantly thinking and talking about the most pressing, horrific crisis that we're currently going through. But partly because I think we do have to take responsibility as skeptics for what we put out into the world, into social media, into different places that we talk about science and things, and not just focus on, well, we need to get the truth out there. We actually need to think about the impact that truth is going to have on people. And having lots and lots of voices giving lots and lots of opinions clearly isn't helping people make good decisions. So let's not start adding even more voices to those topics. Having said that, I'm going to talk about vaccines. But I think it's important to consider when we're actually benefiting people by putting information out there rather than just spouting our opinions constantly, because that's not helpful.
It's an important lesson that I think we learned from the X-Files, is just declaring the truth is out there. Doesn't actually necessarily help anyone. And I've got a sneaking suspicion, and this is entirely without evidence and an evidence-free claim, that the X-Files is in at least a small contributing factor to the prevalence of anti-governmental conspiracy theories, because everyone grew up watching the cocking X-Files, of which the last 8-9 seasons were just all, oh, the deep state is going to come and do this sneaky thing with the guy with the cigarette who keeps meeting people in car parks.
Cigarette man, yeah.
You know, and people have grown up watching this and now suddenly they think it's true.
Just on that deep state thing, one of the great ironies, I think, of current American politics is that absolutely is a deep state. And it's called Mitch McConnell. Like, the reason nothing changes when new governments change, and the reason that there's a complete lockdown and a complete gridlock in what gets done, and the reason that Trump's been able to appoint so many judges and Obama wasn't, is because Mitch McConnell just flat out decided that's how it worked, and nobody was able to do anything. And it doesn't matter what changes around him. So there is a deep state. He's just fucking there and obvious and in the open, as all of the worst things are.
So we like to credit Edward Jenner for it, but inoculation of sorts has actually been around for much, much longer. Maybe it is like the true traditional Chinese medicine, because in the 10th century, inoculation with cotton swabs taken from people who had smallpox was used to generate immunity against smallpox in China.
Aha.
The idea has been derived multiple times from multiple different cultures because it works. Since then, we've figured out ways to make it safe. Inoculating by just essentially contaminating uninfected people with infectious material was effective, but it did carry the risk that they would get really sick. So over the years, we've figured out ways to damage the infectious agents so that they are no longer infectious. These days, most of our vaccines make use of either dead virus, live but weakened virus, called live attenuated, or proteins that we take from infectious viruses. If you've been really paying attention to the news about these new COVID-19 vaccines, you'll notice that the 3 that we have efficacy data for are none of the above. They're entirely new vaccine models. In fact, according to the World Health Organization, there are 48 candidate vaccines that are undergoing clinical evaluation and a load more that are in preclinical phases. And of those 48, only 7 of them are derived from the whole inactivated virus.
I thought one of the 3 we have was that, but it was derived from chimps.
I'm going to explain it.
Okay.
It's not that.
I thought,
I'm telling you now, it's not that.
I thought it was chimps. I thought, well, they've moved on from when they were moving pianos and making cups of tea.
Chimps are involved and viruses are in fact involved, but it's not using this model, this existing model of you take the virus of the thing you want to provide immunity for and kill it or attenuate it. The chimp virus is a virus for something totally different, and we're just using it as a vehicle.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense.
So it's a completely different model.
We're going to piggyback on a chimp.
Yes.
A chimpy back.
Of those 48, only 7 of them are derived from the whole inactivated virus. A few more are based on protein subunits from the virus itself, but over half are what we can call next-generation vaccine platforms. Among these next-gen vaccination options, there are loads of different types. We've got DNA vaccines, RNA vaccines, replicating viral vector vaccines, non-replicating viral vector vaccines. And then we have completely new ideas like self-assembling vaccines and all sorts of other weird and wonderful things.
It's a Swedish one, that, isn't it? The self-assembling vaccines. That's the...
the flat pack version.
Flat pack.
Yeah, you see a little coronavirus with an Allen key.
Many of these options haven't been approved for use in humans before, not because they won't be, just because progress takes time and we haven't got there yet. But the COVID-19 pandemic has given us scientific advancement like nothing else. We are putting everything into this problem. The fact that this is a global problem means we've diverted so many resources into the development of a vaccine that we're able to progress more quickly than ever before and hopefully bring these new vaccine platforms fully into existence. But it means until we make a certain level of progress and get a certain amount of data, it's all hypothetical speculation. I could talk to you about all the different possible vaccine options, but I can't tell you which is the one that's actually going to be taken forward and be the one that works. Worst case, all of these many different options fail and we don't find a vaccine for this virus, or we don't find it in this first batch and we have to come up with new ideas. Best case, they all work and we get to choose the best one. More realistically, some will work well, some will work less well, and over time, the best option or a handful of options will present themselves.
Yeah, or even more realistically, some will work a little bit, others work a little bit more, and over time, the one that has the most marketing put behind it and has the most marketing reps sent out to meet as many doctors as possible is the one that'll do the most.
Yes. So talking about what might happen has largely been a waste of time for people who aren't like actively working in developing these vaccines. Until now we actually have some options. So on the day of recording, 3 companies have announced efficacy data for their vaccine options. So we can talk about these specific options. First up is the Fisa vaccine that was announced at the beginning of the month. They announced their interim data on the 9th of November. So the Fisa vaccine is an mRNA vaccine. In this case, it contains a small piece of messenger RNA. Messenger RNA or mRNA is a molecule that tells your cells how to build a particular protein. So if you think of the human genome of DNA as like a full recipe book, then the mRNA is like a photocopy of one particular recipe in that book. In this case, the mRNA is the recipe for making the coronavirus spike protein, a protein that's on the surface of this virus and helps it to get inside our cells. The mRNA is then packaged inside a lipid nanoparticle to help the mRNA get into your cells. And then once the mRNA is inside the cell uses the ingredients and equipment that it already has inside the cells to follow the recipe and make up a tasty, tasty spike protein.
That is a properly weird way of... I mean, it's cool, but it's really weird to think that that's how that works. Is that you're not injecting yourself with a vaccine, you're injecting yourself with a chef and a recipe book.
Not even a chef. The chef is your cells.
Got the chef.
The cells do all the work.
It's fine. What I loved about this one is because it's you're injecting with messenger RNA and your body is effectively expected to execute the instructions found in that RNA. People are like, I'm going to turn into a coronavirus vaccine, or it's going to make coronavirus itself.
Yeah, you start growing coronavirus spikes on your face.
And obviously all of those things are ridiculous, but it's a reasonable worry that you're putting genetic material of something into your body. People might worry about, well, what if it does something to my DNA in some ways? And the nice thing about mRNA is it's not DNA. And because it's not DNA, because it is RNA, it can't integrate into the human genome. It can't stick itself into your DNA and cause problems there, which is one worry we sometimes have about using genetic material, because DNA likes to jump around a lot. And if it can find a piece of DNA that looks similar to it, it'll jump inside that piece of DNA. RNA can't do that. So you don't have the risk of genetic integration, which means you don't have the risk of creating proteins that might cause, for example, cancer or immune diseases or other sorts of problems. It is an isolated little thing that eventually will degrade and go away and it will stop being in your body.
And obviously we take DNA into our bodies all the time.
Yeah.
Food is a significant portion of that is DNA because we're eating other organisms. And that's never a problem. That's never something that people worry about until you're talking about genetically modified food. And then when they've got salmon DNA inside a tomato, people think they're going to turn into a salmon, or the tomato is going to taste like salmon, or something along those lines. And that's usually a silly thing. But in this case, we are actually executing the instructions, like the machinery within our body is paying attention to that recipe and following it in a way that it doesn't of the DNA that we consume.
Yeah. But equally, as I say, it's a completely different it's a different language almost than our normal DNA, so there's no way it can integrate itself into your DNA. Whereas with DNA vaccines, which are also a thing that exist, we have to be careful to design that DNA carefully to make sure that there's no way that DNA is going to jump into your DNA. And we know how to do that, and we've got clever ways of doing it, but it's a thing to consider when you're injecting something that is the same language as your own DNA. This is a totally different language. They're not compatible. It's not going to do any jumping. It goes into your body follows the recipe, and then it eventually degrades and dies and goes away.
And for more information on that, see Jeff Goldblum's The Fly.
So it's cool. So once your body has made its own version of this spike protein, and it's important that it's this one protein, it's not all the proteins that are needed to create a virus. It's not like your body is going to start manufacturing the virus in any way. It's only creating this one protein. It only has the recipe to create one protein. There is no way, as you say, people are worried that they might create the entire virus. You've only got the recipe for this one protein. You haven't got the recipe for anything else. So there's no way you can make the entire virus in your body. But it does allow your immune system to start to react to build antibodies and gain memory against the spike protein. So if it's ever encountering the SARS-CoV-2 virus in the wild, it's seen some of the proteins that are visible on the surface of that virus again, recognizing them as something it's encountered before and triggering an immune response. So you fight it off really, really quickly.
Yeah, it'd be like, I know how to kill it. I remember this one. I know how to kill this one. Like doing a boss on a Mega Drive game.
Yes, yeah.
I remember this. I've done this one.
If we're sticking with the recipe analogy, it's like your immune system is a kid, and the first time you gave it the tasty spike protein, you lied and said it was tasty candy. But the second time, they're wise to your tricks and get grumpy as soon as they can smell it. mRNA vaccines have lots of benefits. A lot of them are around the ease of manufacture, because you only need to make a piece of mRNA that serves as a recipe for the protein of the virus. You don't need to handle any actual virus at all. You can make loads and loads of vaccine without the need for special viral containment rules and people who have the training that they need to manage the virus, because you don't need the virus to make this vaccine. The mRNA doesn't have enough information to build a whole infectious virus. It's just the recipe for one protein, so there's no infection risk in this manufacturing step, which, of course, is a risk of when you're manufacturing live or even dead viruses, because you need to grow up lots of the virus first and then you need to kill it or attenuate it.
Is there any risk of you teach the body to make this spike, but if you have something else at the same time, those two might interact and you might accidentally give a different virus the spike?
What do you mean?
Like if you've got in the same way that coronaviruses exchange information and sort of mutate if two viruses meet in the same pig, there's no chance that you might be making this spike whilst also suffering a different virus and you end up sort of, your cells are sticking the two together?
If you had a live RNA virus coincidentally at the same time and it incorporates the messenger RNA from the vaccine into its genetic code, I think is what Marsh is getting at.
Yes.
But in Marsh.
I have no idea, but I guess it's technically plausible, but highly, highly unlikely. But I don't know.
Because if so, it'd be like sort of throwing a machine gun through the window to put the window out, and then you find out there's a terrorist in the room. And you've just armed him. Brilliant.
I don't know is the answer to that. I'm not sure. Good question. I am sure it's highly unlikely, and I'm sure it's something that the experts who are making these viruses have considered.
Yeah, this is why you've not been making the vaccines, Alice. It's not crossed your mind. This is why they don't let you tinker around with that stuff.
I do have another question, to which you can tell me that you don't know because it's a stupid question. Is there a reason they chose the spike protein? Is it just because that was recognizable for the immune system? Is it because it was easy? Is it because it was not dangerous in and of itself? Do we know why?
Isn't the spike protein what they use to infiltrate cells?
Yeah, so it's kind of a bit of all of the above in the sense that it's a really abundant protein that is on the surface of the virus and is really easy to see and detect and visible, but it's also really important to the virus because it's how the virus gets inside your cells. So taking out that bit with antibodies is especially useful. You don't want to risk...
I see. Yes. Yeah.
Fragmenting off a bit that it doesn't actually need. I mean, in reality, you would hope your antibodies bring your immune cells that chomp the whole virus and it's not an issue, but targeting the bit that it uses to get in is kind of handy.
Yeah, like if you've got a knife-proof vest, you want it to be like resistant to the blade, not the handle. Because if it gets all the way to the handle, you're already fucked.
The other thing is about the manufacturing of the mRNA viruses is you also don't need to put as much time or effort into growing up loads of virus and then attenuating it or killing it. So with the mRNA, you're literally you make the mRNA, you whack it in a nanoparticle, the body does the rest. Whereas with manufacturing a live virus or a dead virus vaccine, you would have to manufacture the virus and then process the virus in a way that makes it safe. So it's a really simple manufacturing process, but there are some downsides to it as well, largely around the stability of mRNA, which needs to be stored at around -80 degrees Celsius. And even then, it still doesn't last all that long. So I think the Fisa vaccine is stable for 6 months. So it's not like you can stockpile this stuff and keep it in your freezer until you're ready for it. You need to make it fresh every time you want to use it.
Continually manufacturing it, yeah.
And also continually then distributing it to the places that you need to get it, which means if it needs to be stored at -80, you need a way to transport it at -80 as well.
But you need to be able to manufacture it well in advance of when you're going to need it, like Marsha's mum making mince pies for him.
We weren't recording it for that discussion.
No, that was an off-air
sense.
Conversation. It's fine.
It's also a completely new technique. It has never been approved in humans before, which I know a lot of people would take as a scary thing. And it does mean that we need to be testing very thoroughly and very carefully because this is the first time this has been close to approval in humans. But it also means that the COVID-19 pandemic is really giving us, I hate using the word unprecedented, but I think it really fits here, unprecedented leaps in scientific advancement. We are making huge leaps here and designing vaccines that have not been approved before.
Yeah, so fuck you, SARS-CoV-3, when you come around. We're ready for you, you bastard.
Well, I've seen people talking about this and saying, how come science normally takes 10 years in order to get anything done, and the response has been, well, because most of that 10 years is putting in grant applications and being told no.
Yeah,
the actual work is not actually that difficult. It's getting the cash in, and it turns out everyone's falling over themselves to give cash to this.
It's the money, it's the resources, it's the research, pulling researchers off different trials into this trial. It's the getting enough people to sign up to do a clinical trial, to be vaccinated with something. There's no shortage of people wanting to be involved in this. It's more difficult if it's a less sexy savior.
Yeah.
It also puts paid to that conspiracist lie of, well, they don't want to sell you the cure because then they can't monetize the treatment. They'd rather keep you ill and treat you. So, well, if that was the case, we'd be seeing some really impressive treatments for COVID, but no vaccines. But it turns out, no, they just want to stop you getting it, and then you won't die of it. We don't need to treat you if you don't get it in the first place.
Well, and it's the thing I always say, it's a backwards argument to me, because the best thing for pharmaceutical companies is for people to live into old age when they need all of the drugs.
Yes, yeah.
If you live really old, we can sell you all the stuff. The younger you die, the less drugs you need. The shorter your life is, the less drugs you take. Since November the 9th, Pfizer have actually met their study endpoints and released another batch of data on the 18th of November. And they conclude that they have an efficacy rate of above 95%. Over 43,000 people were enrolled in the study. Over 41,000 of those have had 2 doses of the vaccine or placebo. And their primary endpoint was when 170 people enrolled in the study got COVID-19, which they've reached. And they found that 162 of those were in the placebo group and 8 were in the vaccine group.
Blimey.
Which means the vaccine reduces infection rate. The results haven't been published yet. Only press releases have been given, which means we don't know exactly how they analyse their data. The endpoint was reached only a few weeks after giving the vaccine, so we know nothing about whether the effect holds long-term or not, nor do we know if it actually reduces the severity of the disease in those who are vaccinated but still get sick. It's promising, but we're not there yet. The second vaccine, the Mrna one, is also an mRNA vaccine. It also delivers mRNA that allows the cells to produce a version of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. And Mrna have also released interim data that suggests their vaccine is over 90% effective. Again, this is interim data. They haven't reached their endpoint yet. But since vaccination, they've reported 95 COVID-19 cases, 90 of which were in the placebo arm. They say that their vaccine can be stored at minus 20 degrees Celsius, which is normal freezer temperature. So it potentially has the edge over the Pfizer one. Again, they haven't published their findings, so we don't know how they did their analysis or many other details. But again, it's promising. And it's promising that we've got 2 methods of doing the same thing working well.
And one of the things that's really tricky about this, doing this kind of study, is what you can't do. What you have to do is you have to get a big cohort and then wait for someone to get COVID. You can't give them COVID to see if it works.
No, that would be completely unethical.
It's the way you would normally try and do, like when they're studying rhinovirus, they squirt rhinovirus up your nose to give it to you. They can't do that here, so they have to wait until you naturally get it, which is why you get these, we have to wait for 107 of the 43,000 or whatever it was people. We have to wait for 100 odd to catch it by chance before we know if our data's good.
Exactly, yeah. In either case, we don't know if the vaccine reduces transmission. We know nothing about whether it affects transmission. We just know that it reduces the number of people who have infection. And what I'm not sure is whether we even know if this is only symptomatic infection, whether they're only testing people when they get symptoms or whether they're testing everybody involved in the trial every week until they get a positive hit.
I thought with some of the trials, that's what they're doing. Because we've certainly seen with other trials that there's people we know who are involved in trials who are getting tested like every week anyway.
Yeah, and I think that is the case in these trials. I need to just double check whether that's true or not. But what we definitely don't have is data released on whether the people they've detected it in were asymptomatic or symptomatic. And hopefully that will all be included in the full study when it's published properly. But we're still not at that stage yet.
And just on the idea of we don't know whether it prevents transmission, we don't know for certain, but is there any speculation on that? Because I assume with other vaccines for transmissible stuff like this, there's precedent for what typically effect it has on transmission.
It's reasonable to assume that if you reduce duration of illness, which we don't know if these vaccines do yet. So we know that it reduces risk of infection. So if fewer people are infected, there's less transmission, of course. Yeah. So there's that. But what we don't know is how it affects people who still get the virus while they've been vaccinated. So if people get a similarly severe case of COVID that lasts a similar amount of time, we might assume that they would be just as infectious as they would be without the vaccine. If they are less sick or have reduced sickness duration, we might assume that the virus is cleared from their system quicker, so they're less infectious, or they're infectious for less time. So because we don't know we do know a little bit about the severity of the disease, but we don't know a lot about the severity of the disease in people who are vaccinated, it's hard then to say about transmission at that stage.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
And the researchers working on these vaccines may have answers to these questions already. They just haven't published yet.
Exactly, yeah.
When we say we don't know, we mean we don't know.
We literally don't know, yeah.
We mean Alice doesn't know. Because you and I definitely wouldn't know, but Alice doesn't know.
I don't know, mate. Ask me about the placebo arm, mate. I'm going to be all over that shit.
I've read all these press releases in detail a few times, and I've read a lot of so that there are papers about these vaccines that have been published pre this interim data, because they've published the preclinical stuff and they've given data to other scientists who've written about what vaccine options are available. And these are the pieces of information I've pulled together to write this piece. But there's also stuff that you're asking me questions that I can't remember the details of. So
yeah, of course.
Take everything I say with a pinch of salt. But what we don't know is actually whether it reduces transmission. We can speculate that we think it probably does, especially if fewer people are infected, but we need that data. So finally, on the day of recording today, which is Monday, the Oxford vaccine from Astrazeneca released their interim data. So the Astrazeneca vaccine is a whole different method. So this vaccine is a non-replicating viral vector vaccine. Basically, they took a virus that is similar to the cold virus that infects chimpanzees. It's called adenovirus. Has absolutely nothing to do with SARS-CoV-2, but they modified it in two ways. Firstly, they modified it so that it can't replicate, so it can't spread throughout the human body. Then they modified it so that inside its own genetic material, it now contains a gene from the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. Once injected, it gets into your cells using the normal virus pathway of infection, but it can't replicate, so you only get as much as the dose gives you.
I see, yeah.
And then it starts making the spike protein for your immune system to learn how to recognize it. There are two main benefits to this vaccination method. Firstly, similar vaccines have been approved in humans before, so we have more data. Only a few of them because it's also very new, but we at least have a little bit more data. More data is always useful. Secondly, it can be stored at -20, so we don't need special freezers. And it's cheaper, but I'll come to the cost in a sec. One potential downside to this technique is that if you've had an immune response to the adenovirus before, which is unlikely with this type of virus, but possible. So they've picked a viral vector that reduces the risk of this happening, but it is still possible. If you've been exposed to this virus, you've had an immune response to it before, then your immune system will recognize it and kill it off before it can do its thing and give you your SARS-CoV-2 immunity. Again, the AstraZeneca data provides only an interim data point, but they think their vaccine is around 70% effective, which they can increase by modifying how they give the 2 doses of the vaccine.
I did see someone pointing out that the Oxford trial has 70% efficacy, but 70% from Oxford is worth like 90% from everywhere else. Anyway. Anybody from Oxford will tell you that.
So they found that if you give a lower dose followed by a higher dose, so all of these vaccines currently are double dose vaccines. They work best if you take 2 doses. And they found that if you give a lower dose and then a higher dose as the 2 doses, you get to an efficacy of about 90%. But this part of their study only considered around 3,000 people. So we need to really test this further to be sure. The AstraZeneca vaccine will be much cheaper than the other two. The AstraZeneca vaccine is about £3. The Pfizer one's £15 and the Mrna one is £25. And it's easy to transport and store, so it has plenty of benefits. But it has this potential lower efficacy rate. We need to do more research and publish the data that they've got.
What I like about the AstraZeneca vaccine is it's very clearly a very British vaccine, very British vaccine. Get a lot of jowl in there when you say it's a British vaccine. It's a very colonial approach of we're going to invade your system. It's going to be for your own good. What? And that's just the approach we take it here with a good honest British pluck.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about it is if it's going to be manufactured here in the country, we're not going to be fucked when Brexit comes around and we can't import anything. That's the thing I most like about it.
It's a real consideration, and
yeah,
because researching this piece was already quite a lot of research, and as much as I'm trying to simplify it, but I've spent a much longer researching this piece than I would a normal piece. I haven't looked into some of the other important details, like, do we have a plan on how to really get this into each country? Do different countries have their own distribution plans? Are we buying in -80 freezers to make sure that we can store the vaccine? Are we thinking about how we're going to implement this? Are we thinking about who's going to implement this? Are we going to have our army boys back doing vaccinations for people?
It's going to be Dido or Harding, it's going to be Circle, and it's going to be a fucking disaster. Come on, we already know this.
It is a good time to be investing in refrigeration companies, though. If you want to get some shares in Smeg, it's a good time to be getting in there.
Yeah, radio rentals coming back out of admin.
And then on top of that, very logistical consideration for how we're actually going to roll this vaccine out, there are the considerations to have about the human issues with implementation of this vaccine, and whether I suspect we're going to have we're going to have much higher uptake in people who aren't generally engaged with this sort of stuff normally, because it's front of their mind and they're being told by experts that this is a good thing to do. But the people who've gone down that conspiracy route has amplified during the COVID pandemic. And I think there's going to be far more anti-vaxxism, far more anti-vax messaging in the coming months. And that's going to have an appreciable effect on vaccine uptake.
Yeah, I think that might be true. But equally, what we might see is once a vaccine is there and it's a real thing that you can just get, a lot of people are going to weigh up that risk reward and go, actually, I'm just taking the vaccine.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens. I have read, and I've not checked how they've calculated this, but I've read from a couple of sources that potentially for SARS-CoV-2 vaccination, herd immunity can be reached around 60 to 70%. So we often talk about it needing to be up at like 80, 90%. But I've seen from a couple of different sources that it might be a little bit lower for SARS-CoV-2, and it will vary from virus to virus.
Especially things like measles, you need a very high penetration to get that herd immunity because the disease is so contagious.
Yeah.
Measles, a single viral particle with measles is capable of establishing an infection, whereas SARS-CoV-2, for as horrible as it is comparatively difficult to catch compared to something like the measles. I'm concerned with the anti-vaccination because it seems to me like it's something of a no-win situation. Either we will achieve herd immunity and we'll be fine, and the anti-vaccinationists will say, well, I didn't get your sodding vaccine and everything's fine, so that was a waste of time. Or we won't achieve herd immunity and they'll go, you see, your vaccine was a fucking waste of time. And either way, their argument wins. So that's something that's kind of bothering me.
Yeah,
it's true, except when they get it. Except when they get COVID and the vaccinated people don't.
There'll be edge cases. They won't.
There'll be edge cases, but I'm saying.
But that's how it'll get argued away. But like we say all the time, those really hardcore anti-vaxxers, nothing's going to change their mind. We're not going to change their mind with science. We're not going to change their mind with anything. So we focus on saving the most lives and hope the people who aren't fully deep in it will have their minds changed, but the people who are fully all the way there.
And I think we need to talk about anti-vaccination movements, that it's not an anti-vaccination movement, because if we treat it as one homogenous group, they'll act like one homogenous group. But if we recognize that there are some people who are anti-vaccine because they think Bill Gates is one of the satanic pedophiles who are eating children's blood with Tom Hanks, and they want to inject you with microchips, those people aren't going to change their mind. But if it's people who think, we didn't have a vaccine a year ago, we didn't have a vaccine 6 months ago, we've got one now, that's awfully quick, we don't know the side effects, we don't know how this might play out, those are a totally different movement. And that second lot of people are people I think we can reach with good messaging and good education into education programs.
And there is a difference between anti-vax and vaccine hesitancy and even just general fear, because things have been scary enough, and that affects how you make decisions when you're just loaded up on fear all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
In all cases, we're lacking enough data to make any confident statements about what this means, both in the sense that the data we have hasn't been published yet, but also that we haven't done enough research yet. We need to know what the effect looks like after many, many more weeks to see if the immunity conferred by these vaccines holds up over long periods of time. And we need to know whether they reduce transmission and severity of disease. The 2 mRNA vaccines do have some data on this, with 11 severe disease cases all in the placebo arm for the Mrna Vaccine, and 10 severe disease cases, 9 of which were in the placebo arm for the Fisa Vaccine. And I think I can't remember what the Oxford data says. They might have had some severe cases in their placebo arm as well, but not enough to say anything about. But I'd have to double check that.
Yeah.
But in any case, more data will be better to say whether this affects disease severity. You know, to say there's only one severe case in the vaccine arm of the Pfizer vaccine when there were only 8 cases doesn't say it reduces disease severity necessarily. In all cases, the companies are working to make up huge batches of their vaccines as quickly as possible. And I've no doubt that other studies will release their interim data in the coming weeks. But I still don't have a great deal to say about these vaccines. We have promising early data, but these data have been released as press releases without the additional information that scientists need to have a solid opinion on the vaccines. It looks like we could have a vaccine approved in the coming weeks or months, and we may be able to start rolling it out not long after that. Whether it will really change the impact that SARS-CoV-2 has on our lives, it's hard to say yet. We know these vaccines have efficacy within a few weeks of vaccination, but we don't know how long that lasts. And we won't know that for a good while yet. We can start rolling out vaccines in the meantime, but until we know if they have lasting effect, then we can't really say whether it's going to change the impact on our lives. It's promising and exciting. And for scientific advancement in vaccine science, it's really amazing. But for now, I'm staying cautiously optimistic.
So Skeptics in the Pub Online, the award-winning Skeptics in the Pub Online, continues apace with an event coming up this Thursday. So Alice, do you want to give us a bash on that?
Yeah, so on Thursday this week, we have got, the day this podcast comes out, in fact, we've got Dr. Jennifer Wadsworth, who will be talking about planetary protection, Guardians of the Galaxy, or lame science party poopers.
It was the alternative title, the Guardians of the Galaxy. They decided didn't quite have the punch that they needed.
So that's going to be this Thursday at, I always forget what time we do it.
7 p.m.
7 p.m. at twitch.tv/SITP. And then the following Thursday, which is the 3rd of December, we have got Noah Lugeons, who's going to be talking about how religion ruined America's pandemic response, which is going to be very exciting.
It will, and he may even talk about how Alice ruined the hilarious pun that is his name by calling him Lugeons. It's no illusions as in to have no illusions. It's not his real name. It's a pseudonym.
I thought I pronounced it roughly right, but I didn't. I struggle with U's. You know this about me. I know, I can't elongate my U's in that shape, so I did my best. Sorry.
And hopefully Noah will be more animated than he was when I had to cut clips of him together for god-awful movies to try and make it look like he was speaking.
No, I think you should do that live. Just do it live.
Share.
You throw up individual images and see if anybody notices.
It was fun when people were watching it, is they'd said that it just looked like their Wi-Fi was particularly choppy at the time.
I've got a panel coming up as well. I'm doing a panel this weekend, the 29th of November. I'm not exactly sure what time yet because they haven't told me, but it's going to be for the Jewish Labour Movement, the cultural political organisation, they stress, not a religious organisation. And it's going to be a panel about conspiracy theories. I'm going to be there talking about the stuff I've learned around the Flat Earth movement and some of the kind of anti-Semitic tropes that are heavily tied into there. Also on the panel will be Marlon Solomon, who's a comedian actor who's done a whole one-man show about adventures in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, essentially. Dr. Karen Douglas, who's a researcher who's done Skeptics in the Pub talks about conspiracy theories. And also Jill Mulhall from Hope Not Hate, who recently released an entire report on QAnon. So that should be a really interesting panel. I'm not sure who can come to it. I have no details other than the fact that it's for the Jewish Labour movement. But look that up for the 29th. And if you can come wherever it is. I know as much as you do now. I've told you that.
And to finish on a more somber note is we, very recently heard about the passing of Sean Ellis. Sean was, he was a listener at the show. He's a big fan of our stuff. He was a regular at QED. He's very well known within the skeptical community in the UK. Quite a quiet and unassuming kind of bloke, but made a big impact on the people who met him. And he died very recently after a short illness, which was very sad. And I think, we all knew Sean a little bit, and it was actually had quite an impact when we heard he died.
One of the real remarkable things about Sean is how much of an impact he had on people who didn't know him very well. The number of people I've seen tweet since discovering of his passing that have said, I didn't know Sean very well, but he stood out. Like, I met him once, but he stood out as someone who was really nice. And clearly, like, years after meeting him once, he still had an effect on them because he was just that kind of guy who just came across as so kind and compassionate and welcoming that he really did stand out as remarkable to people.
Yeah, he was someone who I don't think I've ever heard anybody say anything like a bad word about him. Just an incredibly nice guy, incredibly kind and supportive. And I'm not sure what the right term is in the area of like affable or amiable, but whenever he was in a conversation with you, you always just felt at ease. He just felt like a very easy person to talk to. He was always a pleasure to be around. I had the pleasure, fortunately, he came along to a couple of my talks. One most recently, I think it might have been, I can't even remember where it was. But I remember just, I think it was Cambridge. It was Cambridge actually came along, and I had a good old chat with him at the bar. And he was just such a lovely fella that you didn't have to have met Sean many times to find it very easy to talk to him and to find his company just incredibly lovely to be around. And he'll be a huge miss at QED, where he was a regular, and we always love to see him there at Skeptics events. To everybody who knew him, he'll be a huge, huge loss.
So on that low note, I think that's all we've got time for.
Yeah, I think so.
All that remains then is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.